Okay, right off the bat, before we even really begin, I want you to do something super simple. Just take a deep breath in and let it out. You probably didn't even have to think about doing that, right? Well, what if I told you that this seemingly simple, completely automatic action is doing so much more than just keeping you alive? Today, we're diving deep into the incredible science behind breathing, and I promise you this explainer is going to completely transform how you think about every single breath you take.
See, we all have this massive misconception that breathing is, just a gas exchange mechanism. We kind of think of it as this biological bellows, bringing oxygen into the lungs, pushing carbon dioxide out. And sure, absolutely, it does that remarkably well for up to 1 billion breaths in a human lifespan. But the real magic? That happens in the brain. The physical act of breathing creates these profound brain-wide ripple effects that actually influence our emotions, our arousal levels, and incredibly enough, our literal ability to form memories.
So, to understand how this all actually works, we need to meet the maestro of this biological symphony. It's called the Breathing Central Pattern Generator, or BCPG for short. And let me tell you, this is definitely not just a simple on and off switch. It's a highly complex neural control system located way down deep in the brainstem. It's constantly generating and transmitting this rhythmic activity, and not just to move your diaphragm. It coordinates your breathing with literally everything else you do, from swallowing and chewing all the way to speaking, laughing, and even crying.
Okay, let's dive into this neural architecture. If you look right at the core of this entire network, there's a tiny region called the pre-Bitzinger complex. Discovered back in the 1990s, this little bilateral structure in the ventrolateral medulla contains just a few thousand neurons. But don't let its size fool you. This is the absolute engine room for our inspirationary rhythm. It is the birthplace of your breath. Basically, everything we're going to talk about today starts right here in the pre-Bitzinger complex.
Now, for the longest time, scientists actually thought this engine room worked a lot like the heart, relying on single pacemaker cells that just sort of tick away on their own. But recent research has totally debunked that old idea. The rhythm of your breath doesn't come from a few special neurons operating in isolation. Instead, it relies on this fascinating collective network property called emergent synchrony. Think of it less like a single solo metronome and a lot more like a massive crowd at a stadium suddenly starting to do the wave altogether.
Let's break down exactly how this stadium wave actually builds up to a single breath. It happens in steps. First off, you've got this low-level asynchronous neuron activity. It's really just a background hum. Step 2, these neurons start to sync up their firing, creating this tiny spark of activity that scientists call a burstlet. Step 3, if enough of these neurons sync up, they hit a critical threshold, a tipping point. And finally, step 4, that tipping point ignites a massive, full-network inspiratory burst that travels straight down to your diaphragm, and boom, you inhale.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about here. You can clearly see how that smaller wave, representing the burstlet, creates this pre-inspiratory buildup of synchronized activity. Notice how it peaks? Well, when that synchronization actually reaches the tipping point we just mentioned, it triggers that much larger, darker peak. That massive spike? That is the actual inspiratory burst, the direct command telling your muscles to pull air into your lungs. To put it simply, the burstlet is the spark and the burst is the fire.
Now, whether or not those neurons successfully pull this off and cross that tipping point depends entirely on a super delicate balance. It's a constant push and pull between background excitation and inhibition. If there's too much inhibition, the neurons just fire randomly, they fail to sync up and no rhythm emerges at all. But when the balance shifts toward excitation, they synchronize, those burstlets form, the tipping point is crossed, and a breath is generated. It's just a beautifully robust yet incredibly flexible system.
But, and this is absolutely crucial to understand, this delicate synchrony-based engine has a fatal flaw. It is uniquely and profoundly vulnerable to opioids. This is the exact mechanism behind opioid-induced respiratory depression, or OIRD. And tragically, this is the primary reason why opioid overdoses are so deadly. We really need to take a quick detour here to understand exactly why this life-saving brainstem rhythm suddenly just stops working when opioids enter the system.
So what's actually happening to shut down the engine at the cellular level? Well, opioids specifically target these mu-opioid receptors right inside the pre-Bitzinger complex. When they bind, they activate Gerk channels. This essentially throws a wet blanket over the neurons by hyperpolarizing them, which drastically reduces their excitability. On top of that, they decrease synaptic release between the cells. The end result? It takes significantly longer for the neurons to synchronize. Those sparks, the burstlets, they really struggle to hit that tipping point. The rhythm slows to a crawl, and eventually the bursts stop altogether.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit and see how this all builds outward. We've looked at the cellular engine of breathing in the brainstem, but how does this mechanical rhythm project upward into our higher cognition? Let's step back to a really relatable scenario. How does a simple breath actually change your memories? I mean, no way, right? Well, the answer to that question reveals that your nose is far, far more than just a filter for the air you breathe.
So the crucial point here is exactly how you take that breath. A completely fascinating study published in the Journal of Neuroscience totally flipped our understanding of this. They actually compared nasal breathing to mouth breathing during a memory consolidation task. Here's what they found. When you breathe through your nose, the airflow physically activates mechanoreceptors in your olfactory system. This creates a rhythm that literally synchronizes with your brain's memory centers, actively boosting your ability to consolidate memories. But when you breathe through your mouth, you bypass those receptors entirely, which reduces that crucial brain modulation and actually results in lower memory recall. Wild, right?
The specific biological mechanism being stimulated when you breathe through your nose is tied to something called sharp wave ripples, or SWRs. These are highly synchronized, super-fast electrical oscillations that occur in the hippocampus, which is basically the main memory center of your brain. These ripples generally happen when you're just resting or sleeping, and they are essentially your brain replaying past events to lock them into long-term storage. And nasal breathing is actively entraining and modulating the occurrence of these memory-saving ripples.
But wait, the story absolutely does not end with the nose. I mean, what if you have a cold and you have to breathe through your mouth? Does your brain just completely lose track of the respiratory rhythm? Thankfully, no. Researchers have discovered a secondary, totally mind-blowing pathway that modulates your brain regardless of whether the air is passing through your nose or your mouth. It's this internal neural mechanism called the respiratory corollary discharge.
To really grasp this, check out this brilliant quote from the research. With each inspiration, the pre-Bitzinger complex sends an ascending respiratory corollary discharge to the brain, which is a copy of the descending motor signal. Think about how incredible that is for a second. At the exact same microsecond your brainstem sends the command downward to your diaphragm to take a breath, it sends a carbon copy of that exact same command upward into your higher brain centers. The brain is essentially CCing itself on every single breath you take.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is where that carbon copy actually goes. Tracing that ascending arrow on our neural circuit diagram, it reaches a structure labeled LC. That stands for the locus coeruleus. This is the primary destination for that internal respiratory signal. So the pre-Bitzinger complex actually has a direct line to this tiny but incredibly powerful region of the brain.
And why does the locus coeruleus matter so much? Because it is the main site in your brain for synthesizing noradrenaline. It's the area that regulates your general emotional arousal, your focus, and your alertness. By receiving a direct excitatory input from the pre-Bitzinger complex with every single breath, your breathing rate is fundamentally biologically tied to your arousal state. And even more amazingly, the locus coeruleus then projects directly into the hippocampus. This means this internal breath signal acts as a second pathway to modulate those memory-consolidating sharp-wave ripples we talked about earlier.
Wow, we have journeyed from a tiny cluster of neurons syncing up in your brainstem to the fragile mechanics that opioids can disrupt, all the way up to the cognitive peaks where simply breathing through your nose actually locks in your memories. Your breath is literally a pacemaker for your brain's emotional and cognitive state. So I'm going to leave you with this. Knowing that every single inhalation physically syncs your brainwaves, the next time you need to focus, calm down, or remember something truly important, how will you take your next breath? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.